The grand chamber of the Galactic Dominion smelled like burnt crystal and old power. The air was thick with the scent of 100 alien bodies, scaled, feathered, and many-limbed, all of them seated in tiered rows that curved upward toward a ceiling carved from a single piece of black asteroid rock. Ambassador Lena Hart stood at the center floor alone, on a raised circle of pale stone that made whoever stood on it look small by design. High Chancellor Breck sat above her on a throne built for exactly that purpose, to make sure no one ever forgot who held the power in this room. He was tall for his species, with 6 eyes arranged in 2 rows, and a voice that carried the smooth confidence of someone who had never once been told no. He had called this meeting with 36 hours of notice. No reason given, just a summons, delivered through the standard diplomatic channel with the tone of a landlord reminding a tenant that rent was due. Lena had not slept. She had read the pre-meeting intelligence brief 6 times on the shuttle ride over. None of it had prepared her for the moment Breck opened his mouth. "Humanity will surrender its colonial territories," he said, not to her specifically, but to the entire chamber. "The 14 colony systems designated in your expansion sectors will be absorbed into Dominion administrative control. The Earth Defense Council will be dissolved. Your people will be recognized as a protected species under Dominion law." He paused. "You have 30 days to comply." The chamber was silent, not the silence of shock, the silence of an audience watching something they already knew the ending to. Lena did not move. She kept her face still and her hands at her sides. She had been trained for moments like this, though she had never honestly believed one would come. She let 5 full seconds pass before she spoke. "30 days is not sufficient time for a matter of this weight," she said. "I will need to consult with my government. I request 60 days. Breck looked at her the way a person looks at something small that has surprised them by making a sound. Then he made a gesture with one long hand, a wave dismissive, almost bored. "60 days, he said. "It will not change anything." The chamber filled with a low sound. It took Lena a moment to recognize it. They were laughing. She rode the shuttle back to the human diplomatic station in silence. Her aide, a young man named Pharaoh, kept looking at her and then looking away. She appreciated that he did not try to speak. There was nothing useful to say yet. When she reached her private office and the door sealed behind her, she sat down and pulled up a secure channel. She composed a single message. It contained no analysis, no recommendations, no diplomatic language. It contained 4 words and a coordinate string. She sent it to Earth. On Earth, in a room 3 levels below the Defense Council chamber, Admiral Dara Voss was already sitting at the table when the message arrived. She had been sitting there for 2 hours, alone, with a cup of water she had not touched. The rest of the council filed in after the alert went out, ministers and generals, and 2 former fleet commanders who had been called back from retirement for this exact contingency. The council argued for 40 minutes. Some wanted to negotiate harder. Some wanted to submit. One minister cried. One general suggested calling the Dominion's bluff, which drew silence from everyone because everyone in that room knew it was not a bluff. Dara listened to all of it without speaking. She had served 31 years in the Earth Defense Force. She had been part of the Ghost Fleet program since its 3rd year of construction. She knew exactly what humanity had built, and she knew exactly what it was built for. When the argument circled back to where it had started, she raised one hand. The room went quiet. "We built it for this," she said. "Not for something like this, for this." No one responded. "Send the signal," she said. The room was still for a moment longer. Then the council chair nodded once. The signal went out 40 minutes later. It was a tight beam transmission, narrow as a needle, aimed at a coordinate in deep space that appeared on no public star chart and in no Dominion database. It traveled at the speed of light through empty space, through the cold dark between stars, through the silence that humanity had been using as cover for 60 years. Lena Hart, still in her office on the diplomatic station, received a single-line confirmation from Earth 3 hours later. She read it. She looked at the wall for a long moment. Then she began drafting the first of what she expected would be many requests for clarification on treaty language. The first tool in a long set of delays she would need to build, one careful day at a time, to give the fleet enough time to move. 60 days, Breck had said. She intended to use every one of them. The Dead Star had no name. It had a catalog number, a string of letters and digits that no one ever said out loud, and it had a debris field that stretched for 11 million kilometers in every direction, a slow-turning graveyard of rock and frozen gas that had been drifting in silence for 400,000 years. Nobody came here. There was nothing to come for. That was the point. Deep inside the debris field, nestled between two tumbling masses of iron-rich rock the size of small moons, 84 warships sat in total darkness. No running lights, no active sensors, no heat signatures above the ambient temperature of the surrounding rock. They had been sitting this way for years, crewed in rotating shifts, maintained in perfect silence by people who had accepted a life of extraordinary patience in service of a purpose they might never see fulfilled. The signal changed that. It arrived as a tight beam pulse, encoded in a frequency that the Dominion did not use and therefore did not monitor. The communications officer on the receiving ship, a quiet woman named Surrey who had been on watch for 6 hours, verified the authentication code 3 times before she reached for the fleet-wide alert. She did not hesitate. She had been trained to act immediately when this message came. The alert was not a sound. It was a light, a single blue pulse that rippled through every ship in the fleet simultaneously, visible only from inside sealed bridge compartments. 84 crews came awake at the same moment. There were no cheers, no speeches. People moved to stations and began running through startup sequences that they had rehearsed so many times the motions were automatic. Commander Ren Akafer reached the bridge of the Ironhold at a walk, not a run. Running would have looked like panic. He had been awake for 20 minutes by the time he sat in the command chair. Word traveled fast on a ship that had been waiting for one specific thing. Engineer Paulo Nduka's voice came through the comm before Ren could speak. Primary systems online, reactors nominal, weapons holding at standby. You want the full board. Full board, Ren said. The display lit up across the front of the bridge. 84 icons in pale blue, arranged in their formation columns, each one representing a ship that had been built in secret over 6 decades by people who believed that the question was not whether this moment would come, but when. Everything's green, Paulo said, all of it. Has it ever not been? No, Paulo admitted, but I keep checking. The fleet spent the next 4 hours running silent diagnostics. Every system, every backup, every redundancy that had been engineered into the hull, because the people who designed these ships had studied Dominion weapons technology for 40 years and understood exactly what kind of punishment they needed to absorb and survive. When the diagnostics finished, Ren ordered column formation. The fleet moved out of the debris field slowly, one ship at a time, threading between the rock masses without a single collision. In complete darkness, no assistance from anything outside the hull. They had practiced this too. 40 light-years away, inside the Dominion's administrative center on the station called the Spine, Fleet Commander Sova was having a different kind of morning. She had spent the night going through humanity's filed economic reports, the production numbers that every recognized species was required to submit to the Dominion every 3 years. It was tedious work that no one above her rank would bother with, which was exactly why she was doing it. The numbers did not add up. Human industrial capacity, their mining output, energy generation, material refining, was 3 to 4 times higher than their declared military infrastructure could account for. The gap had been growing for decades. Someone had been filing the production reports honestly, perhaps too honestly, while keeping the military applications off the record entirely. She built a model, she ran it twice. The results were the same. Whatever the gap represented, it was not small. It was not a few extra patrol ships or a hidden research station. The volume of unaccounted material was large enough to build something significant, many significant somethings. She pulled together her findings and requested an urgent audience with High Chancellor Breck. He received her that afternoon. She walked him through the model carefully, without editorializing, letting the numbers speak. Breck listened. He looked at the display. He was quiet for a moment. You are describing 60-year-old budget discrepancies in reports filed by a species that did not know how to leave its own solar system when those reports began, he said. I am describing a pattern, Sova said. Sova? Breck's voice was patient in the way that powerful people are patient with subordinates they find tiresome. The Sixth Fleet is already moving to pre-deployment position. Humanity has 51 days left to comply. This will be resolved without incident. She looked at him. She wanted to say more. She had 20 more pages of analysis she had not shown him yet. You are dismissed, Breck said. Sova walked back to her office and sat down in front of her model. She pulled up the numbers again. She stared at the gap, the enormous, decades-long gap, and felt something in her chest that she could not name but that she had learned to take seriously. She opened a new file and began writing. If she was wrong, she would look foolish. She had survived looking foolish before. If she was right, someone needed to have a record of the warning. On the 14th day after the ultimatum, Ambassador Lena Hart submitted a formal request for clarification on Article 7 of the Dominion's proposed terms. Specifically, the definition of colonial territory as it applied to human installations that existed before the Dominion had formally recognized humanity as a species. This was not a question with a simple answer. She knew that. The Dominion's legal office knew that. The 3 subcommittees that would need to weigh in on it definitely knew that. It would take at least a week. On the 21st day, she requested a full translation review of the treaty document, noting that the Dominion's standard template used a legal dialect of Vernish that had not been updated in 80 years, and that several key terms had shifted meaning in modern usage. She submitted a list of 41 terms requiring review. Another 8 days. On the 32nd day, she raised a procedural concern about the composition of the Verification Committee that would oversee the dissolution of the Earth Defense Council, noting that 2 of the appointed committee members belonged to species whose governments had unresolved trade disputes with Earth, which raised questions of impartiality under Dominion Charter law. 6 more days of back and forth. Pharaoh, her aide, kept a running tally on a small screen in his jacket pocket. He updated it every morning. On day 40, he quietly showed her the number, 18 days remaining. She nodded and went back to work. She was buying time for something she had not been told the details of and had not asked about. She understood the value of not knowing. If Breck's people ever questioned her, really questioned her, with a neural probe or a chemical agent or whatever the current standard was, there needed to be a wall between her and whatever was moving in deep space. She trusted that Dara Voss knew what she was doing. Admiral Dara Voss was, at that moment, 300 kilometers from the edge of the Iran system, aboard the Ironhold, watching the destroyer wing run its 4th formation strike of the day. She stood at the observation window on the port side of the bridge and watched Senior Captain Whale Idris lead his wing through the exercise. 14 destroyers, moving at combat speed, splitting into 2 groups, curving wide around a pair of sensor buoys that served as simulated capital ships, and hitting from opposite sides within 4 seconds of each other. Clean, fast, coordinated. Commander Ren Okafor came to stand beside her. 3rd run was tighter, he said. 4th run was faster, she said. Ren considered that. Idris pushes the speed as the runs go on. He gets impatient. He gets confident, Dara said. There's a difference. I want to talk to him about the gap on the 2nd approach vector. His wing opens up by about 200 meters when they pull into the curve. In a real engagement, that's a targeting window. I'll set it up. After dinner, let them finish clean. They watched 2 more full runs. The wing got the approach vector tighter on the 6th attempt. Dara noted it without comment. That evening she addressed the full fleet over the common channel, all 84 ships, all crews, in whatever rotation they were on. She stood at the comms console in the Ironhold's command room with no prepared speech, because prepared speeches sounded like prepared speeches, and she had always believed that people could tell the difference. She told them they had 15 days until the deadline. She told them the Dominion's 6th Fleet was already positioned for deployment. She told them that the 6th Fleet was larger than their force by a factor of nearly 3 to 1 in terms of raw ship count. Then she told them the other things. She told them that the Ghost Fleet had been built with the full knowledge of Dominion weapon specifications, hull composites, and shield technology. That the engineers who designed the Ironhold and her sister ships had studied every Dominion combat engagement from the last 2 centuries and had engineered specifically against what they found. That the 6th Fleet had not fought a real war in 180 years, and that her crews had been running live-fire combat drills for the past 3 years straight. She told them that the Dominion was going to see what 60 years of patience looked like when it moved. There was a silence on the channel after she stopped speaking, not an empty silence, a full one. Then from somewhere across the fleet, one person started a slow, rhythmic knock against something metal. Then another and another, until the sound was coming from everywhere, rolling across the channel in waves, 84 crews tapping steel in the dark. Dara kept her expression still. She had not expected that. She let it run for 30 seconds, then clicked off the channel. On day 59, Lena Hart walked into the Dominion's Grand Reception Hall and formally submitted humanity's final response to the ultimatum. It was 1 page. It was very clearly written. The answer was no. Breck read it in front of his full council. The silence in the room was of a different kind than the one 3 weeks earlier, less comfortable. He set the document down and looked at nothing for a moment. Then he opened the deployment channel and ordered the 6th Fleet to move. Vora Station had been built 30 years ago by a mining consortium that had since gone bankrupt and sold the structure to the Earth Defense Council for less than the cost of the ore it had processed in its first year of operation. It was not a beautiful station. It was practical, a squat ring of pressurized modules around a central docking core, positioned at the edge of human space like a door left open. When the 6th Fleet came out of long-range transit, Vora Station was dark and empty. Every human soul had been evacuated 6 days prior, relocated to the inner colonies without announcement or public explanation. The official word was a maintenance shutdown. Nobody had questioned it loudly enough to matter. The 6th Fleet commander, a broad-shouldered being named Orath, who had served the Dominion for 40 years and had never once lost a deployment, looked at the dark station on his forward display and felt a small, cold note of unease that he told himself was nothing. The fleet moved in, standard approach pattern. Vora was the entry point, and once it was secured, the colonial systems beyond it would fall in sequence. That was the plan. Orath had overseen the briefing himself. 14 human colonies, none of them heavily defended, all of them within reach of the 6th Fleet's logistics chain. His lead vessels were 40,000 kilometers from the station when the display changed. It did not change gradually. 84 contacts appeared simultaneously, not approaching from a distance, but already there, already close, already in formation. They had been running cold inside the debris shadow on the far side of Vora, their heat signatures masked by the station's own residual thermal output. The moment Orath's lead ships crossed the threshold, the human fleet powered up. All 84 at once. The tactical officer made a sound that Orath had never heard from him before. The human ships were arranged in a complete encirclement. Not a loose one, a precise geometric cage, every firing angle covered, every vector of escape already bracketed by at least 3 vessels. The formations were interlocking. If the 6th Fleet tried to break in any direction, they would be moving toward fire, not away from it. Fleet Commander Sova was standing at the rear of the command deck as an observer. She had been permitted to come along because Breck thought it would be instructive for her, a lesson in how real deployments went, a contrast to her spreadsheet concerns. She looked at the display and felt every number from her model land in her chest at the same time. There it was. The comm channel opened without a request. A human voice came through, a woman's voice, steady, unhurried, with no particular emphasis on any individual word. She identified herself as Admiral Dara Voss of the Earth Combined Fleet. She identified every human vessel by name in sequence, all 84, which took 90 seconds and was clearly deliberate. Then she stated the position of the Sixth Fleet relative to her formation in precise tactical language that demonstrated she had been watching them long before they arrived. Then she gave Orath a choice: surrender his fleet and stand down, or face the consequences. She used the same framework, the same structure, the same 30-day window, framing it so precisely that every member of the Dominion Council listening on the broadcast channel would recognize what she was doing. The same words returned. Orath looked at his tactical display. Then he looked at his weapons officer. Then he looked at Sova, who looked back at him and said nothing, because there was nothing for her to say. He had been in the Dominion fleet for 40 years. He had never surrendered. He did not believe in surrender as a concept in situations where his fleet still had weapons and power. He gave the order to fire. The battle opened with the Sixth Fleet's long-range batteries, the weapons that were supposed to crack a human formation apart before they could respond. The shots were accurate. They hit their targets. The human ships did not crack. The Ironhold took 3 direct hits from Capital-class energy weapons in the first 11 seconds and kept moving. The shots burned through the outer ablative layer and stopped at the secondary hull, a composite that the Dominion had no record of, because it had been developed in a human materials lab specifically to counter Dominion weapons signatures. "They're tanking it," Wren said from his station. His voice was not loud. He sounded like someone confirming something they had always expected to be true. "Return fire," Dara said. "All ships." The human fleet fired as a coordinated unit, not as individual vessels. The targeting solutions had been loaded before the fleet left the debris shadow. Dara's tactical team had spent 3 days running probability models on every approach vector the Sixth Fleet might use, and had prepared firing solutions for all of them. The Dominion ships had no equivalent preparation. They were fighting a battle they had expected to be over in minutes. It was not going to be over in minutes. Sova gripped the back of a chair and watched her worst prediction come true in real time. She had written it all down. She had filed it. She had been dismissed. Orath was shouting orders. His fleet was still fighting. She gave him that. He was not the kind of being who gave up cleanly. But on the display, the Sixth Fleet's formation was already breaking apart, and the human cage was closing. 40 minutes into the Battle of Vora, 3 things became clear to everyone watching from inside the Sixth Fleet. The first was that the human ships did not fight the way Dominion doctrine said ships should fight. They did not hold formation at a safe distance and exchange fire at the edge of weapon range. They closed. They came in hard and fast, eating incoming fire with their heavy hulls, and they got close, uncomfortably, deliberately close, where their weapons hit harder and their size advantage meant something. The second was that the human ships talked to each other in ways the Sixth Fleet could not intercept or jam. Short-burst encrypted signals, spread spectrum, cycling through frequencies faster than the Dominion's electronic warfare suite could track. They were coordinating in real time, and the Sixth Fleet could not stop them from doing it. The third was that the human ships did not go down easily. They went down eventually. 3 of the smaller ones had been destroyed by the 40-minute mark, but they went down fighting, and they took ships with them when they went. Deep inside the Ironhold, engineer Paulo Nduka was not at his console. He was in the access corridor on the lower engineering deck, on his back in a space 40 centimeters wide, with sparking conduit above him and heat that had turned the air into something that burned the lungs. A hit 8 minutes earlier had taken out the primary power relay for the port weapons array. The automated repair system had flagged it and sent a repair drone, but the drone had gotten 3 meters in before the secondary pressure failure had blocked the route. Paulo had watched this happen on his screen, done the math in about 4 seconds, and decided that the fastest solution was himself. He had a bag of tools, a replacement relay module, and a communicator clipped to his collar. "Talk to me," Ren's voice said through the communicator. "Working," Paulo said. "Time. Less time if you stop asking." He found the failed section. The relay housing had partially melted, not from the hit itself, but from the heat buildup that followed. He needed to pull it without damaging the adjacent routing nodes, which required more patience than the situation seemed to call for. He slowed down. He had learned, over 22 years of keeping ships alive, that panic was the most reliable way to make a small problem into an unrecoverable one. Outside, Senior Captain Whale Idris had taken the destroyer wing and split them into 2 groups, just as they had practiced. The first group circled wide around the 6th Fleet's left formation and drew fire, not trying to dodge it, just absorbing it and staying alive long enough. The second group came from the other side at full thrust and hit the command structure of the left formation while its attention was on the first group. It was not complicated. It did not need to be. Idris had identified early in the battle that the 6th Fleet's captains were trained to respond to threats in sequence, deal with the most immediate problem, then the next one. Human doctrine had been designed to present multiple simultaneous problems, too many to handle in sequence, too many to triage cleanly. The Dominion ships kept reacting, kept trying to restore order to a formation that was being continuously disrupted. 3 Dominion capital ships were gone by the 50-minute mark. 7 more were disabled. The 6th Fleet's outer formation had collapsed, and the surviving ships were grouping toward the center, a defensive instinct that made tactical sense, but that the human fleet had prepared for. Paulo got the relay seated. He ran the seal, checked it again, and called back up to Ren. "Port array is live." A pause, then Ren said, "Good timing." The Ironhold's port weapons fired 30 seconds later as part of a coordinated strike with 4 other capital ships that broke the last functional command group in the 6th Fleet's center. After that, Orath's fleet stopped being a coordinated force and became individual ships making individual decisions about survival. Fleet Commander Sova was still on the command deck. Orath had been injured in the second major strike, not badly, but enough that he was seated against the far wall with a pressure bandage on his arm, while 2 of his junior officers tried to manage what was left. Sova had not taken command because this was not her deployment and she had no authority here, but she watched everything with complete attention. She counted the surviving 6th Fleet vessels. She counted what was left of their weapons capacity. She did the arithmetic. When the human fleet went quiet, all fire stopping at once across the entire formation, she straightened and looked at the forward display. On the comm channel, Dara Voss spoke. "Cease fire and stand down. This engagement is over." Orath from the wall rasped an order to his comms officer. The order was to request terms. Sova moved to the comms station. She did not ask for permission. She took the channel from the junior officer who was too shaken to object, and she opened a direct line to the Ironhold. "Admiral Voss," she said, "this is Fleet Commander Sova. I am the senior able officer aboard the command vessel. I am requesting a private channel." A brief silence. "Granted," Dara said. Sova looked out at the display, at what remained of the largest military force the Dominion had deployed in 2 centuries. Then she looked at what had stopped it. She had quite a lot to say to High Chancellor Breck. She began composing her message in her head before Dara's voice even came back on the line. Sova's message arrived at the spine before the 6th Fleet did. She had transmitted it the moment Dara Voss gave her the private channel, and she had not been kind about it. She had included the full tactical record from the battle, every exchange, every weapon's impact, Every moment a human ship absorbed a hit that should have ended it and kept moving. She had attached her original analysis from 3 weeks ago, the one Breck had dismissed, with a single line added at the end. The line read, "I told you." Breck received it in his private office rather than in chambers, which was unusual. His staff had learned to read the small signals. When he took a briefing alone rather than in front of the council, it meant he did not want an audience for whatever expression crossed his face when the information landed. He read it twice. He watched the attached battle footage for 9 minutes, then stopped it before the end, because the end was the part where the surviving 6th Fleet vessels came home in formation. A tight, orderly column being escorted through human space by 4 human warships, which was a thing that had simply never happened before in the history of the Dominion. Dara Voss had not destroyed the retreating ships. She had sent them home with an escort. He understood what that meant. Everyone with a tactical mind would understand what it meant. It was not mercy. It was a demonstration. She had let them go because she could afford to, because stopping them had never required the full force she had available, and because she wanted Breck to understand both of those things clearly before their next conversation. He sat alone in his office for 22 minutes. Then he called his chief of staff and told him to prepare the Grand Chamber for a formal session. The 31 species of the Dominion's governing council watched the battle footage before the session opened. Breck had not planned for that. Someone on his staff had distributed it, or someone else had, or perhaps Sova had sent it through a broader channel on purpose. He suspected the last one. By the time the session began, everyone in the chamber knew what had happened at Vora. The normal background noise of 200 alien bodies in a closed space was absent. They were quiet in a way that was entirely new. Lena Hart walked into the Grand Chamber on the same pale stone circle where she had stood 63 days ago. She was not alone this time. 2 members of the Earth Defense Council had traveled with her, and they stood at the edges of the circle, present, visible, not speaking. Lena placed a document on the submission lectern. It was 18 pages. She had spent 10 days writing it. "Humanity's terms for a resolution," she said. There was no performance in her voice. No anger, no triumph. She was tired and she had not slept enough and she had been running diplomatic delays for 2 months and she simply wanted to be done. She walked the chamber through the terms. Full recognition of human sovereignty across all 14 colonial systems and any future expansion within designated sectors. Complete withdrawal of all Dominion military presence from human space. Reparations equal to the economic cost of the colonial disruption caused by the ultimatum period. She had a number ready, and it was a real number, not a symbolic one. And a permanent seat on the Dominion's governing council, with full voting rights, equal to those of any other recognized species. Breck listened to all of it without interruption. When she finished, the chamber was quiet. One of the council members, a small, 4-armed being from a species that had been in the Dominion for 300 years, raised a procedural flag asking whether the reparations figure could be negotiated. Lena told her it could not. Breck looked at the document. He looked at the tactical display someone had left open on the chamber's central screen, still frozen on the moment of encirclement at Vora. He looked at his council. He looked at nothing for a moment. He picked up the document. He signed it. The chamber filled with sound, not celebration, but the complicated, overlapping noise of 200 beings processing something they had not expected to live through. Several of them were looking at Lena Hart with expressions she could not fully read. Some of them were looking at each other. Sova, who had returned with the fleet and had been permitted to attend as an observer at her own request, stood near the back of the room and looked at the ceiling for a moment with an expression that might have been relief. On the iron hold, Ren Akafer received the confirmation signal from Earth's diplomatic team. He walked to the window at the end of the bridge corridor, the long one that faced aft, out toward the fleet formation, and looked at the 81 ships still holding their positions in the dark. 3 lost at Vora. 71 of them had come through without losing anyone. It was a number he had already committed to memory. He found Dara on the bridge. She was reading a readiness report. She looked up when he came in. "It's done," he said. "Breck signed." She set the report down. She looked out at the fleet through the forward windows for a long moment. Then she said, "Order a full stand down. Hot meals, full rack time. Nobody runs a drill for the next 48 hours. And the fleet." She turned back to the window. 81 dark hulls held formation in the space between stars, quiet as they had always been, patient as the people who had built them. "The fleet stays," she said. "It was never going anywhere."